Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I know a lot of you know Mark Gillespie, and I ran into him at Bourbon Festival. I live in Bardstown, Kentucky. And I ran into him at the Bourbon Festival, and he said, hey, Lisa, I threw your name in the hat for this thing. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome, you know? And I started looking into it. I was like, oh, holy cow. But apparently you were short on non-bearded, mature distillers.
I was going to
I
share
took that
yeah,
spot,
yeah.
right. So my start, I was a commercial winemaker for years. I moved to Kentucky. I got asked to build a winery in Kentucky. Kentucky actually has a very old wine tradition. Prohibition wiped it out. The first commercial vineyard in the United States was in Kentucky. Thomas Jefferson sent rootstocks down the Ohio River, and some of them were planted in southern Indiana, and some of them were planted in northern Kentucky. Obviously, that was not a viable project at that time. But Kentucky grew the wine industry because of its French immigrants, a couple monasteries with French Trappist monks that are still there. They also established vineyards, but before Prohibition, it was actually the second largest wine producing state in the United States. A lot of people don't know that. Prohibition wiped it out. Everybody was very poor because of closing the distilleries and most people's livelihoods, whether they were farmers or distillers. And at that point, everybody either went back into tobacco or into corn for whiskey with the startup and reopening of all the distilleries in 1934. So what I like to think of, everybody's like this craft movement, what we're doing is we're reestablishing the craft distilleries that dotted the countryside everywhere. You drive through central Kentucky, you take off in Marion County, you hit Maker's Mark, Limestone Branch is the new distillery there, but you go down the road and all these defunct distilleries were there. You hit the little town of St. Francis, there was a distillery there, you hit the Smith distillery, you hit the Dant distillery, and on and on and on. There were close to 2,000 distilleries in Kentucky before Prohibition. Lots of family, beyond local, right? But that's how many legal licenses. It didn't mean that everybody distributed by any means, but it certainly meant that distilling was certainly a way of life. So when I had the opportunity to move to Kentucky and open a winery, or build a winery, I jumped on it because I'd always wanted to learn how to distill. So I thought, this is great. I'll go to Kentucky, I'll wiggle my way onto the legislative committee, which I did, so I can get a still to distill brandy, and I can learn from the community there. Well, the winery project went really well. It had an established 10-year-old vineyard, and then the owners decided to go through a really spectacular divorce. And so at that point, I saw, we're leaking here somewhere. So at that point in time, I saw the writing on the wall, but in the interim, I had met Steve Beam, and Steve is obviously a Beam, but he was on the branch of cousins that did not stay in distilling. His father worked in a distillery. His grandfather was a very famous distiller. His mother was a Dant. And so distilling was rich in his blood. He was a landscape architect. He decided now or never, or he was either going to break the 7-generation chain of distilling. So he was building a distillery down the road from the winery where I was, and I had a license and no building. He had a building and no license, and we spent a lot of time exchanging ideas and actually just working with each other with a lot of physical labor when we needed an extra set of hands. So when the winery project didn't look like it was going to pan out, I tried to regroup, decide what I was going to do. Was disappointed I wasn't going to learn to distill, but I'd already been working with Steve in the evenings, and so when I resigned, I booked a flight to Sonoma. I thought, well, I'm going to have to work a harvest with some of my friends, and that's just, I'll talk about that later. And thank you. And so anyway, the next day, after I resigned, Paul and Steve, so there wouldn't be any conflict of interest, took me to dinner. Paul and Steve Beam took me to dinner and offered me a full-time position with Limestone Branch, and I haven't looked back. I thought winemaking was the best job in the whole world. I was sorely mistaken. Distilling is the best job in the whole world. So, the first 3 years at Limestone Branch, pressure cooker, cash flow product. We've talked about how you stay sustainable financially. I tell people putting whiskey back is a reverse pyramid scheme. You're only going to keep putting more and more and more money out the door rather than bringing any money back in. Trying to establish a cash flow product line that people understand without having to give an explanation in a tasting room, and has some integrity, has quality, is a really difficult thing. You hit a lot of arrows starting to shoot at you, and you have to give lots of explanations, but Steve was committed to making a really high-quality white whiskey that was infused. unfortunately it falls under the umbrella of flavored whiskey, right? But it was a very viable cash flow product. Because of that, we started taking on more and more client work, and again, baptism by fire. People wanted artificial flavoring. I can't do that. It's just not in me to do that. So what I was doing was taking client proposals and then breaking those artificial flavors down into natural flavors. So if somebody wanted a vanilla flavored product, sometimes I used 4 sources of vanilla to get vanilla on the nose and vanilla on the palate. I even went to a sugar I know the horror of it, but I'm saying, I even went to a sugar tasting with some bakers so that I knew that I was getting the right source of cane sugar, because if you back sweeten product, you start to learn if it's beet sugar, it tastes like vegetables. If it's cane sugar, it tastes like sugar cane. And there's so many different grades and qualities out there, and the most expensive one doesn't mean necessarily that it's the best source. So anyway, you keep learning and breaking these things down. We released I brought what I knew from winemaking, I see Kathy out here, and introduced using adjuncts in white spirits. And of course, we got a lot of grief over that, because it's like, it wasn't an aged spirit, it was a colored spirit, but not artificially colored. We actually introduced some oak into some sugar whiskey, and people were horrified. Our first big break was Kentucky Bourbon Festival tasted it, they allowed us to pour it. Mark Gillespie and a few other people discovered it that night and were actually surprised what they were tasting, because I took that from winemaking, knew that I couldn't just take a bunch of oak chips and throw it in there and turn it into something with some color and say, okay, this is going to be delicious, right? It's not. But through lots of trial and error, Steve was really generous with me. I had a gazillion 55-gallon drums around with every conceivable white spirit, with every kind of infusion going on, and every kind of wood experiment that I could possibly talk him into. We worked on from there. Oh my gosh, heirloom corn. Steve was committed early on to growing heirloom corn. We grew Trucker's Choice. It's called, it's 2 or 3 different names. A white heirloom. People would come into the distillery and say, what's wrong with that cornfield over there? Because the standability issues with heirlooms. And but we were paying a premium. We were paying the farmer to grow it. We didn't know what we were doing. He didn't know what he was doing. But we paid them a premium to be sure that he was getting per acre what he would on his yellow dent crop. The good news is most everyone in Kentucky has not adopted GMO corn, and there's 2 or 3 reasons why. Number 1, you can't sell it internationally, right? But number 2, the conversations I've had there, people are afraid of what it's going to be in 10 years. They're just going to stay with what they know right now. Takeaways from Limestone Branch. Oh my gosh. Like I said, small barrels. We did a lot of small barrel experiments. Fortunately, we were 7 minutes from interstate from Kentucky Cooperage. So we were really fortunate that we did a lot of experimentation there. And through that came up with several ideas and focus what Steve was going to do, because Steve's goal was to bring back some of the family labels, Old Yellowstone in particular. He's brought it back. Because Old Yellowstone, the dance owned it, his mother owned it at one time, his father owned it at another time, and he wanted the brand back. And so in order to do that, finally acquisition time. Luxco came in, 50% interest, I got fired. So it's like, do I go back to winemaking after 3 years, or do I stay in distilling? I thought, I stay in distilling. I put in a lot of 65 to 80-hour weeks, baptism by fire, and I wasn't ready to let go yet. So after that point in time, I'm trying to think, I should have another takeaway or 2 from Limestone Branch. It was interesting in traditional whiskey country who you had to explain what you were doing to and who you didn't have to. We had so many people come in and like, well, if you don't have any real bourbon, I'm not staying. They would taste the product and they'd leave with 3 bottles, right? I'm sure they didn't serve it to their friends, but they were drinking it. When Luxco came in, Steve got the infusion of cash that he needed to bring the Old Yellowstone label back. They started with Source Whiskey, Old Yellowstone, Luxco, and I don't know when his first, I think he's released his first Limestone Branch distilled whiskey under the Old Yellowstone label, so I'm happy for him he got that back. I ran down to South Carolina and North Carolina, did a couple projects down there for some people. Interesting models there. Some people that are perfectly happy staying in the white whiskey business. They were successful, they're marketers, their funding came from other sources, some other successful businesses that they had, and they'll never it's a different model. You know, everybody's got a different model. They'll never leave white whiskey. It's fun for them. It's a fun project. It's comic relief for what they do to their day-to-day. They were committed to making a really high-quality product, and they're still on the market. I was happy to hear that the distribution's going really well there as well. So, turned around Ted Huber, Starlight Distillery, small craft distillery in southern Indiana. Ted's family was German. They had a 700-acre farm, a lot of fruit trees, orchards, and he put in 700 acres of corn and started experimenting, making some whiskey. The law hadn't changed there yet, but they had a 35-year tradition of making brandy there. A small Christian Carl Still. He makes some beautiful brandies. He usually takes lots of top awards in the craft spirits associations and things, but they decided to add a grain distillery. So I went there, was hired there, and thought I'd never leave. Great family to work for. We grew Bloody Butcher, we grew Hopi Blue, and we grew a white heirloom that has a number on it. I don't know that it has a formal name on it. And Ted let me go wild. We did 4-grain bourbons, we did 3-grain, we did rye whiskey, we did some malt whiskey, until we could start settling in. We ran the red by itself, we ran the white by itself, we ran the blue by itself, we ran the red, white, and blue together, we ran the white and the red. We substituted some white corn, some yellow corn, and continued on there until all kinds of craziness. But Ted also is an innovator, an entrepreneur. His family's been in the same farming business for 7 generations, and he still thinks outside the box. He's very generous with his time and his resources, and with convincing people that what he's doing is the right thing to do, even with some of these crazy projects that he likes to do there. Because of Ted, he asked me one day to do a tour, and because he wasn't going to be there, and he said the gentleman that worked there volunteered or worked at George Washington's distillery, and you know that's a pipe dream, right? And he found out that I'd fermented in wood at Limestone Branch, and they were having a few little issues here and there, and asked if I could come out. I was distilling 6 to 7 days a week at that point in time. I asked Ted, can I go out there? He said, yes, you can. I said, I'll take 2 days. He said, take 4 or 5. You're going to love it out there. And I walk in the door. I fall in love with the place. Steve Bayshore here. Steve's the director of trades at Mount Vernon. He is the miller and head distiller at Mount Vernon. And so he has been very generous to let me come in and do my thing. So I've been the consulting distiller there for 2 years now. It is soul food. If anybody ever has an opportunity and you're in the States and you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you have to stop in and see the distillery and the grist mill. It's remarkable. Everything's still hand done. When things get crazy, building distilleries and all kinds of things, it's so elemental. It's water, it's grain, it's wood fire, it's metal, and it smells amazing. It's really a really wonderful thing. All these fermenters, 54, did we set 54 last? We did a rum project in January, and the temperature outside was 9 degrees, which means the temperature inside the distillery was 9 degrees. And then whiskeys gets run in the fall and the spring. We've up to 54 fermenters and have flip-flopped some of the protocols there. And everybody seems pretty happy with what's going on these days. But I love returning there because it definitely is a place to ground you very much. I told Steve, first day I'm in there, I said, I usually like to observe for a day and a half before I say anything. It's sort of a joke now. This is the beginning of the second day. I said, I'm sorry, I can't keep my mouth shut anymore. I'm going to have to say something now, but very happy with the project. I like to put this picture up because I have had people, one gentleman worked with me on a project for 3 days, and the heat was ridiculous, and he was working with me on, he was installing some cooling equipment when I was still making wine, and I couldn't keep the temperature down on my fermentation. And I spent 3 days with him. Bathing was not a priority, and I see him at an event a week later, and he puts his hand out. He said, I'm sorry, we haven't met. So I smiled at him, and he goes, oh, he said, I sure recognize the smile, but I sure as hell can't come up with the rest of it. So I can look a little rough sometimes. So I like to put the picture up so people can recognize me when I'm at work, because it happens frequently. Out of this project and the TED project, I got a phone call. Drew Colesby and the Willet Master Distillers a friend and neighbor in Bardstown and another friend of his asked if he knew anybody that might oversee the building and construction of a small distillery in Bardstown. So he said, yeah, I think I know somebody. And I didn't think I'd ever leave Ted Huber. He gave me too much opportunity, and I was doing too many crazy, wonderful projects, and was really pleased with the whiskey. I'm never happy with what I do, so I have to keep, the winemaker that trained me gave me the best piece of advice ever. He's like, don't drink your own juice, you're going to start to like it, And so it's made me my own best critic over the years, because there's some truth in it. And so I decide to resign TED, and I go on and build a small distillery in Bardstown. I converted a very small distillery compared to everybody else. Thought it was going to be an easier project than when I started out, but everybody's used to the big guys. So you go to the city and you go to the county, and everybody is like, well, how much are you going to discharge? I'm like, well, only this much, And so getting their head around the micro distillery, it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. What I did discover during this project, the big guys are as intrigued as the little guys. Everybody was beyond kind and beyond helpful. My resources were beyond anything I ever dreamed. They're curious. In Kentucky, a phenomenon is happening where the big guys are hiring away some of the little guys. I've had calls from some of the big guys because they had said they're trying to be non-corporate and think outside the box. And vice versa, some of the smaller distilleries have hired the guys that have been running the bigger distilleries. I have a corn project in Kentucky right now, and I convinced the farmer that grows for Maker's Mark and Sazerac that we should be his first heirloom project. We're doing it. I couldn't get crop insurance. It's not a proven crop until after 2 years. So it's a lot of risk takers and gamblers, and I guess farmers are the ultimate gamblers, right? And they've agreed to grow the corn. I kid you not, I pray every night. I watch the weather forecast. When I'm back in Kentucky, that's the first thing I do is I drive out to the cornfield to make sure everything's going okay. I have corn growing in New York State and Pennsylvania as well. People are eager to grow the heirlooms. I think it's gotten a lot of press, even for culinary reasons in the last couple of years. Food and Wine ran an article on Buddy Butcher. NPR ran a series on heirloom grains and heirloom corns. And it seems to be easier and easier to access those. My difficulties on some of those have been that the growers are too small, or we're still a learning curve on what constitutes healthy grain and what the distiller's needs are, as opposed to what's convenient for the farmer to grow and store. So build the distillery, think I'm staying on as the distiller. And this industry has grown so fast. When I started at Limestone Branch, there were 250 DSPs in the United States. I think as Colin, maybe you can help me on that, 2,500 DSPs are out and about 1,500 are open, I think, 1,600. So, it's growing at a rate, there's not enough warm bodies. So another phone call, everything gets more and more tempting, right? I get another phone call. Sampson & Surrey calls me. Sampson & Surrey is a group of ex-Bacardi execs. I think you guys know probably several of them. They came together to buy brands that basically they're buying with their guts, with their hearts, maybe not with their heads. But all of it, the portfolios come together. They're fabulous people to work for. They're very demanding and incredibly kind. I'm spending most of my time right now in Brooklyn bringing Widow Jane back online, so I still live in Bardstown, and I commute where I need to go, when I need to go there. The life of an itinerant distiller is very appealing. I love every minute of it. I never know, I was telling you at our table, when my boss calls, I have no idea what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be I fly with my steel-toed boots all over everywhere. I was in the TSA looking in my bag. But it's just a phenomenal industry. Everybody is so excited and so willing to take some risks, to take some chances, to keep pushing to the quality. Liza has been, Steve has been, we've been judges for American Craft Spirits Association, and the quality it's just been phenomenal, the growth in quality. It's really stunning. You take the quality of the distillate, people understanding that everything that they make doesn't have to go in the bottle. I keep my humble jar at home. Some of the first distillate I ever made, it's awful. And I'm so proud of it. I thought it was pretty darn good when I first time I drank it, right? And it's awful, but I keep it to remind myself how bad it was at the time. But for the perspective of it, it's remarkable what has happened in 7 years. It's so hard to even put it into words. You see people changing their barrel formats. You see them changing their grain bills. You see them digging in deeper instead of just hitting a wall of exhaustion and saying, this is all I've got, this is all I'm going to do anymore. Everybody's like, what else can I do to push the limits? What can I do for the grain? What can I do for my local farmer? What can I do for my local community? The sense of terroir is there, you know, it's very real. I'm working with a barrel cooperage in Kentucky that unfortunately had a large contract with one of the big guys cut because of a change in direction with the ownership team. But they've been so willing. They've been in this business for 30 years. They've been coopering the old Atherton distillery there. And they were willing to, you know, we've got a 1 million barrel profile now because they're excited about it. You know, it's not, I can't order the numbers of barrels from them that they're used to having in one order or another. But it's just phenomenal. I mean, it's just really, really exciting. So I get the distillery, like I said, I get the distillery built, Sampson and Surrey. Like I said, the projects I can talk about right now. Widow Jane hadn't distilled in 1.5 years. I have them back online. We inherited one-of-a-kind trademarked corn with that project. And, you know, it's a challenge, right? We're doing some rye. We're going to do some malt whiskey. Somebody asked the question earlier, too, what happens when the crop fails? Something I'm doing, I'll let you know if it works out or not. I'm running a lot of experimental bills with other corns and things that in case this fails, that I could go to another farmer in New York and say, do you have, you know, X, Y, Z on more current heirlooms that are out there right now. But overall, it's just, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to hear what I'm hearing, and keep on the good work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think it's so amazing, you know, in 7 years, really, it's gone from, you know, this bunch of kind of people just tasting things out into, you know, an industry in general. And it's so quick, you know, the evolution is so quick.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's what surprises the big guys the most is the sophistication level of what's happening at the craft level. You know, the corners that they believed were being cut in the beginning are not any longer. People's fermentation skills have gotten so much stronger. I have kind of a couple bulletproof mash bills that I use when I work with new clients. And then they can go from there. They can start adding and eliminating and making it their own. You know, it's some of my friends at Wilderness Trail in Danville, Kentucky, are Firm Solutions, and they, you know, sneak around to old distillery sites and identify and isolate those yeast, you know, and then, you know, those solitalos. And but we have so many more options available than even 7 years ago. It's just remarkable.
And thinking of your previous life then, I mean, what do you think the most important thing you brought to distilling was from your wine background? And what surprised you most, or maybe shocked you most about distilling?
Fermentation skills were probably the handiest thing that I brought over. It gets crazy sometimes, right? You know, but those basic spoilage, you know, the basic spoilage in fermentation, you walk in, you smell H2S, you're like, uh-oh, you know, and so that's that sort of thing. The thing that surprised me the most when I started blending spirits, wine, if you want to increase something that's favorable, like, well, I'm going to use 70% of that wine and 30% of this wine. In spirits, you start blending them and you'll negate the nose. All of a sudden, you start putting two together and you're like, the nose is so delicious on this, and I'm going to put this with this, and the nose will go away. Or vice versa, you'll try to get it on the palate, and the palate will go away and you have this fabulous, beautiful nose. And that was the biggest surprise for me, and probably my biggest frustration. Still is some days.
It sounds, you know, from that answer, it's still at the stage of evolution. You know, and I'm not saying that everything is known about wine. Probably more is known about wine and the parameters of quality and excellence, then conceivably, you know, the new boundaries that we're exploring in distillation.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, you know, we kind of know what the parameters are in terms of quality and wine goes, but there's still some unknowns perhaps within distillation.
There are, you know, and of course, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm just preaching to the choir here as far as all the different choices on equipment and distillation processes. And one thing I see in craft distilling a lot is because people get panicked with the timeline on equipment, and so they'll start ordering equipment before they have any business plan, they have any idea what product they're going to make, you know, and so you end up making whiskey on a brandy still, which actually is really delicious, but, you know, but people don't necessarily get educated in the basics before they just jump off and start running, and that is actually part of the excitement about it. You know, it's fun to be able to go in and say, well, you know, ideally in an ideal world you would use this type of still with this type of you know, to make this type of distillate, but you have to work with what they have and what's available, and that problem solving always turns out something really amazingly wonderful that is usually unpredictable.
So yeah, so you have to have, and it's coming back to Simon's point, that kind of element of the unknown.
Yeah.
Not using the word madness anymore, Simon, it's okay. But yeah, that element of the unknown is important in terms of like creating something from scratch.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you know, like I said, when I pick up the phone or I walk into a new distillery, I just never know. I just never know, and that's part of the thrill of it. Yeah.
So, open to the floor. Any questions here? Becky?
Hi, I'm Becky Paskin. You were talking about heirloom varieties, and I wondered, why do you think heirloom varieties of corn have become so popular to use among distillers, and what's the, how large is the difference between each different variety that you use in the final distillate?
My analogy always is go to the farmer's market. You can I think you can do this anywhere in the world now. You go to the farmer's market, you go to the grocery store and buy a hothouse tomato, and you go to the farmer's market and you buy an heirloom tomato, and you have this perfectly red, round, blemish-free tomato. But it may not taste like a tomato, it may just taste like nothing, right? And then you go to the farmer's market and you buy these gorgeous big heirloom misshapen tomatoes, and some of them are purple and some of them are yellow and red and some of them are green, some of them are black, you know? But the flavors are all there, they're all very different. And what we've done, this is my personal soapbox, what we've done is hybridize things into a point where, like the corn, one of our issues is going to be this fall is standability. The heirlooms grow really irregularly. So already, the corn I'm overseeing in New York is about here, Pennsylvania is about here, and Kentucky's right here already. But that corn is all different heights. So you come in with mechanically harvesting it, and the machines may not match the plants. And so part of what we've done is, of course, we want higher yields, right, and everything, but part of it is to match our machinery and our labor and our workforce, because, you know, we can no longer go in and hand pick all of that corn. We're going to have to harvest it, and so those are things that we're looking at. You know, I cross my fingers we don't have a hailstorm, you know, right at the end towards harvest, because a lot of those stalks won't stand. The ears on Bloody Butcher, they'll vary from this long to this long. The kernel size will vary dramatically. There'll be sometimes a regular pattern, and then the next time you go and you pick out an ear that's exactly what you expect to be, it's this long, it's perfect, the kernels are all uniform in size, but the next stalk isn't going to look the same. So that trade-off, but the flavors are so dramatic. I had a client project, and one of my distiller friends was running a larger distillery, was running the distillate for me, and he calls me, and I have lots of trucks on the road with heirloom corn, and he calls me and he said, "Lisa, something's not right." And I said, "Well, is the whiskey bad?" He goes, "I don't know." I'm like, it's a well-known distiller. I'm like, "What do you mean you don't know if the whiskey's bad? Do I stop the trucks? You know, what are we going to do here?" And I said, "I'll get in my truck. I'm on the road, right?" And I call a gentleman that's my mentor, and I said, "Can you come with me?" You know, and he's like, "Yeah." And I walk, you know, and everybody's standing around. I go into the lab, and they're all looking in there, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is the difference between yellow dent distillate and an heirloom corn." So that's the reason they wouldn't tell me that it was bad, but they didn't know it, because the flavor is ridiculous. It's so, I'm not going to say it's better, it's just different. It's just really, really different. And so with that corn, lots of fluctuations. I've made every mistake in the book. The reason I have any success at all in distilling is because I have screwed it up. Whatever it is, you asked me, I've screwed it up. One of the things I did on cooking temperatures, I was working with heirloom corn, Ted Huber. I get a ridiculous conversion. I'm like, what is this? So I take him the refractometer, and I was like, will you look at this? I don't know this is crazy. I checked it 3 times, and I hadn't cooked it as hot. And the conversion was better. Because the heirloom corns are not the same animal as the yellow dent corn. And so because of that, we're changing, I'm changing hold times, I'm changing temperatures. I'm always experimenting with those until we can get a sweet spot. Some of the corns even seem to have a different spot than other varieties of corn. Ask me in 2 more years what those are and what the contrast is. I can't tell you right now because I'm still in the thick of trying to do that. I think everybody in here, the rye bread was awesome because some farmers they'll bring you all these heirloom varieties. The first thing I like to do is cook it into cornbread because you can already tell what the heat is going to do and maybe what some of those flavors, characteristics. Some of them, there was a green corn, way too herbal, delicious, but I don't know that it was merchantable, And so that you make those decisions too. It's like, well, this is a really sexy thing to make, but is it merchantable? So you're making those decisions, not knowing what people are going to want. But the bent seems to be that people are always looking for the local now. They're looking for the unusual. But I think they're looking for ridiculously high quality. We can't let's go with that.
Important message, that, I think. Any other questions? Time for just maybe one more. Okay, I'll jump in. More of a business question, actually. And especially, do you think that new distillers don't perhaps understand the boring business side of things? They come in as great enthusiasts, they like drinking, and they suddenly become distillers.
Yes.
But they don't actually understand the tedious stuff like route to market and etc. etc.
Oh,
Is that something you've experienced?
They don't understand twice as much money. They really think that they've done their business plans correctly and that there's just no way and where that things could cost that much. That's the first thing I see. And so what happens is they get themselves so strapped. Never say never. The promise and threat of this business, I know a well-known distillery, they swore they would never, not us, will never release any white spirit, will not do vodka, will not do gin. We're only going to do whiskey. We're going to put this much, we've got this much money invested, we can hold on to these barrels for this many years, and they're releasing white spirits. Because the cash flow, like I said, it's that reverse pyramid scheme, and I think people just don't have a grip on how much that's really going to cost them, if that's what their business plan is.
And that's the kind of counterbalance. So it's great to play, it's great to be innovative and try great things to increase quality, but at the same time you've got to have.
Is it merchantable?
You've got to have an accountant kind of sitting there and they're going, maybe not.
Right.
So is there always a trade-off? Or is it a trade-off, or is it just having a...
that's an interesting question. I don't believe so. I think getting in a pattern of one-offs all the time, rather than settling in on a product, keep running it for a while. Okay, you need some comic relief, do a one-off, right? And then go back to what you were doing. Do it with a plan a little bit. It's fun to experiment, it's fun to play. That's the reason I bake cornbread instead of making, 1,000 gallons of mash at a time. And, but with the idea of what do we do, if there's a question back here earlier, what do we do? How do we accommodate this if that crop does fail? Okay, I have this special heirloom corn. All of a sudden, everybody's discovered, right? Everybody's discovered Bloody Butcher. Well, it makes really good whiskey. And, for years, you've got people knocking on your door going, I've got excess Bloody Butcher, will you buy it? So you need to kind of know ahead of time what your escape plan is, right? What your emergency plan is. Because with being a little guy and knowing you can't handle the interruption, I love the idea of just skipping a year, right? If you don't have it, you don't have it. It's like a bad grape crop. But the reality is, when you get into the market and you're getting into that pipeline, you're going to have to keep backing what the distributors want to know. Are you going to be able to back this product up? Are you going to be able to deliver? Are you overextended? What's your presence? We're giving you this much shelf space. You lose that shelf space, the plot closes back up, and you don't get it back. So yeah, lots of stuff.
It's the joy and the harsh realities of the story. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Rosa.
absolutely.